Today I'm gonna make a motion tracker from the Alien franchise. For this build, I used EVA foam, craft foam, wood, super glue, hot glue, cutting tools, sanding tools, safety gear, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter. I started with a square magnifying glass lens and worked my way out from there. This one's glass, which makes it kind of heavy, but that's actually kind of accurate for the CRT screens commonly associated with the Alien franchise. I mean, have you ever had to lift an old TV? I don't have nostalgia for CRT screens. I do have nostalgia for channel surfing. You know, it was faster. I didn't need the guide. Commercial break! Quick, check 60 channels in 10 seconds! I made a frame out of green foam from scrap floor mats left over from the M41A blaster build. Shout out. Linked somewhere. It's around. Made a stencil for each panel because some of them had to be duplicated, and I don't want any deviation. It'll look sloppy. When I'm done, I'll clean those up and make them available to all of you fine folks. They'll be linked in the description down below. When they were cut out, I glued them together to form a little box. I weighted that down with a metal machinist block, but any weight will do, really. When the glue dried, I built out the rest of the motion tracker parts from there, using that as my scale reference. Starting with this pyramid on the back, I used gray foam for that, and cut the edges at an angle so that the seams would line up. Again, more blocks. When the CRT frame was done, I did a test fitting. It fits, but to keep it from sliding all the way to the back, I had to put in some shims so I have room for lighting and things later. These shims are offcuts from the puzzle pieces. I saved the triangles to use as gear teeth for like steampunk builds or even diesel punk. I think the last time I used them for that was on the Hydra Stomper, but you can't see it, you know? It's there, but who's paying attention to the inside of the elbow? I think they call that detail oriented to a fault, or maybe just hoarding. I don't know. We'll see. Ask the people who dragged me away kicking and screaming. Next, for the cylinder sticking out from it, I cut a length of dowel, and for the sensor at the end of it, I found a cap. This came off of a toy scientific sample container, which is kind of weird for a toy. Although, I mean, you want to encourage education. Maybe you want them to be a scientist. It's not as weird as that nuclear science kit from the 1960s that had actual radioactive material in it. Progress. Then I glued it to the end. Gonna let that sit for a minute and work on the handle brackets. It's not so much that the glue takes a long time to dry as it is I have to eliminate that wood texture, which means I gotta paint it, and that's gonna take a while, and it's gonna be boring, so let's do that off camera. I used more green foam for the handle brackets. I traced them out flat first, and then added bends using my work knife to cut out little notches in there. I also drilled a hole in the end for the carabiner to go through. I did this before cutting it out because once it's cut out, the drilling process could easily rip the foam. Okay, then I cut it out using a work knife, which I consistently sharpen. I said that a little sarcastically, but it is just because I do it so often. I have to say these things in every video because there's always someone watching for the first time. You don't want them to be discouraged. So yeah, the foam dulls out the blade, just sharpen it and have a few spares lying around, you know? Work knife blades are cheap. I also cut away the pattern where it would be visible. Then I glued it to the side of the monitor. When it was secure, I cut a notch out of the interior so that I could make a 90-degree bend. I used super glue to get it to hold that bend just for the convenience. It sets up faster than hot glue and it doesn't smush out. Although I'm not sure that would be visible there. I don't know, either one I guess. Then I cut off the excess and applied that change to my template. See, this is why I'm always starting with cardboard when I make these things, because there's always some refinement, you know? Next, I cut an even longer length of foam for the handle bracket. There's another clip loop on the side there. I cut it out. I drilled another hole. Okay, so I didn't need to wait to drill that. Good to know. Then I cut another notch for a 90-degree bend, but before I do the other one, I need to figure out the exact length of the actual handle. So I got an even narrower wooden dowel, measured it against my fist, and cut a length from it so that it would fit me. Okay, quick side story. Warning, incoming tangent. I'm average height, so I make the mistake of assuming that everyone else on the planet is exactly the same height as me. So I recently built a K2SO droid from Star Wars, and I went off one photograph where it's standing in parallel to the actor and decided, okay, it's that much taller than a person. The actor is 6 inches shorter than me, so my K2 droid is absurdly tall. Please excuse the crudity of this model, it's not to scale. Then I took some leftover puzzle strips, cut off the puzzles, and cut those into lengths. I wrapped them around around the dowel to make grip bands. Then I painted the whole thing black. When it dried, I used it to figure out the placement of the second 90-degree angle bend in the bracket notch. Then I drilled another larger hole for the base of the handle to set into. Again, super glue and metal blocks. Then I drilled really small holes for the bolts. You don't need a hole punch for this, you could use a drill or a very narrow tube, I suppose. Just I have the tools, so I'm going to use the tools. Next, I attached the handle bracket to the monitor bracket. Then I traced and cut a section for the module on the lower front portion of the tracker, and I used the completed bracket to mark the holes for the bolts to go so that they would both line up. Then I drilled those out. I needed those to line up, so I held them in place with skewers while I glued them together. Then I added actual bolts. No foam bolts for this. They aren't necessary to hold it together, it's just faster to use real ones than to make fake foam bolts. Not to mention, this whole thing is going to be ridiculously top heavy, so if we can get some ballast in here, some keel stones if you will, then I glued in the handle. See, sometimes if you build these things in the logical order, then you can't get in there to do all the minute details later. Gotta think about these things. Now I have to build the front module, which I assume is a battery, at least partially a battery case. I cut 3 more rectangular sections, roughly the same dimensions as the one that I've already attached to the handle. I cut one flat to match that section, but the other 2, I cut the long sides slanted. Then I cut end caps. I attached them to the narrower rectangle first, then glued it to the main assembly, and then attach the sides to close it up. Depending on how much wiring you want to do, you maybe want to leave one of these open. It's up to you. I added bevels to the top for the cylinder to set into, sort of nestle between. I trimmed those up a bit. Before closing up the screen, I added some white foam to the inside, partially to improve the reflectivity of the light, just to illuminate as much of the screen as possible, but also partially to prevent light leak, because I'm sure there's some gaps between those seams on the gray foam pyramid on the back. Oh, also at some point in here I painted the sensor cylinder black, which is also why I waited so long to attach it. I try to go in an order that's easy for people to follow, but yeah, it's not always the case. I attached a base plate of gray foam, then some spacers for puzzle pieces, then glued it to the base plate. I had to cover the spacers with some foam half cylinders. I added a foam wrap to the handle, then a larger foam wrap to the front module. I'm out of 4mm green foam. I don't think I had any to begin with. So I cut a thicker plate down to size. I do not recommend this. Just cut a bunch of thinner pieces. I wrapped it around the battery case. That's just what I'm gonna call it from now on. This had to be done one side at a time because the foam's very springy, so that means I have to fill this dead air with some ad-libbing and hopefully not start a flame war. Some version of the motion tracker has been in almost every installment of the Alien franchise so far, but not the show, which, you know, a lot of people aren't crazy about for one reason or another. Personally, I think the production design is the best it's ever been, and, you know, as far as the casting and the hair and makeup, the Sam Bankman-Fried / Steve Jobs amalgamation, perfect casting. Such a good villain. And of course everyone loves the eye. But one thing where I'm having trouble suspending my disbelief is the name choices for like characters and places and things. It's a little bit too on point. It's not very subtle. For instance, I heard the name of the spaceship was the Maginot, and I'm like, really? Really? Why not call it the Foreshadowing, or the Space Titanic, or the Our spaceship definitely won't crash into a skyscraper and ignite an international incident? Who is going to name a spaceship that? Who's hearing that name and then getting on board that spaceship? Who's signing that contract? And apparently a lot of people, because as I watched review after review and heard host after host pronounce it Maginot, yeah, so spaceship's called Maginot, I realized, holy shit, no one knows history. So yeah, a lot of people are getting on that spaceship. To be fair, it's French. They put a lot of unnecessary letters in their words. But my God, the Maginot is literally a cautionary tale at this point. Right up there with the unsinkable Titanic or the Battle of Agincourt. Although, again, devil's advocate advocate. I've definitely heard people pronounce it Agincourt. Okay, so because this is a pet peeve of mine, I'm going to inflict a history lesson upon you. Now you're gonna have to stick with me here, because it's going to sound like I'm saying something political, but I'm literally just stating facts, okay? These are facts. About 100 years ago, the French had problems with the Germans crossing their border, so to stop the Germans from crossing their border, they went to their border and they built a wall on their border. It was a big wall. It was a beautiful wall, made of steel and concrete, with observation posts and point defense weaponry. It was called the Maginot Line. And you know what happened? The Germans went around it. Sacre bleu! The Germans can turn! We thought they could only travel in straight lines! That's like a French-German amalgamation. That character is from Alsace-Lorraine. Never said it was a mimic. I build things. I don't say words good. To be fair, a few years later, the Germans also built a border wall to keep the Americans out. Americans, etc. Americans, Britons, Canadians, Free Poles, all the allies. And the allies went over the wall because planes are a thing. Also ladders and Bangalores. So again, for people thinking that I'm making some kind of a political point, it's history. It's literally history. They say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I disagree. I think it repeats itself. I'm seeing a lot of signs. Every 100 years there's a pandemic, Russia invades Ukraine, the Titanic kills millionaires. It's all just on a loop. We're stuck on a loop. It's like that one episode of Star Trek where Data stacks the deck and gets away with it. I may have missed the point of that episode. So, in conclusion, the lesson from history is that no one ever learns a single lesson from history. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to be needlessly sacrificed in the mud of Verdun, wearing a very silly helmet. They were all silly. So the name Maginot is going down in history as a colossal boondoggle that's applied to any endeavor that's seen as such. And that's what Yutani named her ship. But apparently they got away with it because nobody noticed. Good luck, humanity! Hey Jake, why do you live in a fantasy world? Because reality is boring. I've seen it before. You just keep rebooting the last 100 years. I added a bunch of foam greeblies to the sensor cylinder. They're not accurate to the game, but like most of the time you're only seeing it from one angle anyway. And I thought it looked cool. So this is what I'm doing. If you don't like it, build your own motion tracker. I dare you. Plus, I have a million foam greeblies left over from other builds, and I gotta use them up. I need to make space. I added a 2mm ramp to the front lower module and some strap attachment points to the top of the monitor. Then I used more 2mm foam for the strap itself and more actual screws. Then I used radio dials for the dials on the side of the monitor. After that, I cut up green buttons for the other side. I added an attachment point for the cord, a plate for the switch, a hole for the switch. For the cord itself, I used an old telephone cord. What's that, right? An ancient relic that you can only find in the deepest, darkest catacombs of Goodwill. And where do I find one of those? Where the brave dare not tread. The maw. I attached it to the tracker, then I drilled a hole for the light. Next, I made a washer out of black foam using a wide hole punch and then a narrow hole punch. I placed a red light cap into it and then inserted it into the tracker. There are various labels and logos that go on the exterior. I'm not gonna go so far as to print all those labels, but I do have metallic gold and silver 2mm foam, which you can now find at various chain craft stores. So I cut up some of that and glued them onto the tracker. I added some of the final details to the monitor case and then added triangular bevels to the sensor, making it look like a vent. Then a carabiner to the top loop. Weirdly, nothing to the lower loop. You would think, just because of video game dynamics, you know, there'd be a strap, because you're always like lugging all this gear with you that just sort of appears when you need it. Just put like a thread of plausible deniability in there. Just add straps to everything. Give your video game character a utility belt. Give me some credit. Now for the screen itself, I simply printed out a graphic on a regular old paper, cut it down to size so it would fit, and set it into the screen. Oh, there's also an LED light in there as well. Lastly, I dropped in the glass, and that was it. That's how to make a motion tracker. Now this is the part of the video where I test out the prop, and there's usually a joke that usually ends at my expense, but considering the scene that it's from and the potential expense, I've taken certain precautions for my own safety. Namely, I've removed my drop ceiling. Because I'm smart. Alright, let's fire it up, and here we go. Doesn't make any sense. That's inside the room. But how? I specifically took precautions to... I forgot to close the door again. My bad, this one's on me. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, I'd like to thank my patrons. These videos just wouldn't be possible without the support of my patrons. So if you enjoy these builds, want to see more of them, and want your build request to carry a bit more weight, then think about heading on over to the Patreon page, where you can enjoy ad-free early uploads. Alright, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the bell icon to be notified of the future uploads, because it's kind of at a totally random schedule. And let me know what other props you'd like to see me make in comments down below. Thanks again, happy crafting, see you later!